why? And my thoughts go back now, ladies and gentlemen, to a more distant day. 1938 this time. I was not yet 10. My birthday's in July, and this happened in March. My father was technically very clever, unlike myself. He built a loudspeaker receiving set. And because he had a loudspeaker receiving set, the neighbors came in to our little flat because the Chancellor of the Republic was to make his farewell speech. And it was better to listen on the loudspeaker than on the earphones. You know, it's strange that I couldn't remember all this. I remember who was there. And I remember Dr. Kurt von Schuschnigg. By the sound of his voice, he must have had tears in his eyes as he told his audience that the plebiscite, which was to have taken place on a Sunday, was now not to take place. And in his capacity as Chancellor, he had been empowered by the President, Dr. Miklas, to take charge of the security. And in that capacity, he had given orders. After deliberation with his conscience and with his colleagues, to save the useless spilling of blood, that the borders between our country and Germany should be lifted, and that German troops should enter our country without any resistance whatsoever. I know he finished with Gott schütze Österreich, God save Austria. I couldn't understand why my mother and sister were crying. What's so sad? I was too young to understand this. But I do know it was Friday. Friday is very important to Jewish people. Because on Friday evening, by tradition, when we see the first stars, is where we welcome the Sabbath. The senior lady of the house would beckon in with her hands the Sabbath. She would cover her head, and we would wish each other Shabbat Shalom, as we do every Sabbath. But this time there was an atmosphere which wasn't happy. Not the normal Sabbath joy. And for us children that was a big joy, because Sabbath, Friday night, no matter how poor we were, it was always the best meal of the week. No matter if the meals during the week were scanty because of the finances, how my mother did it. There was always a traditional chicken soup. And we looked forward to the Sabbath. But this time it was somber as we went to bed. The next morning, Saturday, my father decided that we must go to the synagogue. I must clarify here, we can only have a service in a house of prayer or privately if there are 10 men. We call this a minyan. And my father said we must go to our little synagogue in the Humboldtplatz, because who knows when we'll have a minyan again. My mother pleaded with him, please don't go, it could be dangerous. Don't go. No, I must go, and what is more, Otto must go with me. That walk I remember so well. I couldn't keep up with my father. We didn't have far to go. I toddled behind him. He had big steps and I couldn't keep up. Before we reached the synagogue building, the warden, or as we call the Shams, met us, beckoned us in quickly as the doors were to be closed. Now perhaps here I must explain something else. Part of the service on the Sabbath is when we take the scrolls, what we call a Sefer Torah, from the Ark. And when the scrolls are taken through the congregation, and then the rabbi would read from the scroll. And I had a great honor last Saturday. I was called up to be by the rabbi as he read from the scroll. But this wasn't going to happen on that day. This was not going to happen. Instead of taking out the scrolls, the ark was locked, because by now we could hear the verbal indignation. Why indignation? The verbal abuse of the people who had been our neighbors, who were in our apartment the previous day. The same people. Judah verrecke, perish Judah. But now there were not only vocal insults, but the first pebbles were hitting the windows. Ours was a lovely little synagogue. We kept it very well, despite the fact that we were only a small community. My father came over to me. Otto, go home. Go home? Well, isn't he going home? No, he must stay. It was a duty of the men to protect the Torah scrolls, the Sefer Torahs. I didn't go home. I knew Vienna very well. I knew my way around. I still do. I came to the very city. It's a beautiful inner city. And I stood at the same spot where I stood a few weeks ago. Still there, that little grass oasis in the Ringstrasse, just by the parliament, when I saw the swastika hoisted, the red, white, red banner lowered. And the people cheered and cheered and cheered. Why did they cheer? Well, we had in Vienna unemployment. Vienna was no longer the capital of a huge empire. It was the capital of a provincial county town. No, it wasn't even that. But it's fair to say not everybody cheered. There were a few men with tears in their eyes. Now, it's not nice to see a grown man weep. It's a sight which isn't very pleasant. And every day after that, laws were passed. Laws which I couldn't understand. Jews mustn't have pets, for instance, not own bikes. Jews mustn't be stockbrokers. Jews mustn't be doctors. Jews mustn't do this. But that didn't affect me, a 10-year-old. What did I care that Jews couldn't be stockbrokers? I didn't know what a stockbroker was. But when I went to the local park, the Ataba Park, and wanted to kick about my football as I enjoyed, I saw that there was one law which affected me. For on the park gates, there was a big notice, Juden verboten, Jews not allowed. I couldn't understand. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it came home to me, to a 10-year-old, that from that moment onwards, our lives were to be completely different. And go back now to that moment on the Westbahnhof. I don't quite know how I felt. Mixed emotions. Excitement, yes. Sadness. I'd never been away from my parents. But a day later reassured me, my sister, be a good boy, we'll see each other soon. I believed it. She must have known we won't see each other soon. we won't see each other again. And how comes something which I just don't understand? If I can relate in detail the many things that I've already detailed, I can't remember much about the journey. All I know is I was exhausted, I was confused, and the train left the city behind, and soon we were in open country. But what I remember vividly is the sign which said Holland 2 kilometers as we approached the Dutch border. Now here, ladies and gentlemen, I remember things well. We were in the last carriage of a long train. The first few carriages were already on Dutch soil. We could hear the children in the first few carriages sing and jubilate. They sang the song of hope, the Hatikwa. But we were still on German soil. And how well I remember now. The SS officer in his black uniform, passport controller. They've seen my passport so many times, well, yet again. Now I have here, perhaps afterwards, with permission, I can lay these few documents on the table and you can ask me. For I've got a facsimile of my original passport. And the most important is a crease. A crease? What's so important about a crease? That this SS man took my passport and was about to destroy it. The crease is still there. You can see it. It's still there. I remember him, a monocle in his eye. I suppose even evil men got consciences. Perhaps had a boy of my age, I don't know. He gave it back to me. And that reminds me to this very day that when I feel a bit in the dumps, as you say in England, when you feel not so good, you think to yourself of that moment when he gave the passport back to me. And when I came alive. Soon we also were on Dutch soil. There was a beautiful feeling that we were free now. There was nobody going to challenge us because we were Jews. Nobody was going to do us any harm. And I pay tribute after all these years to these lovely Dutch people, especially peasant women, farmers' wives, who gave us flowers, Holland of course, fruit, sweets, but above all showed us love, which we hadn't seen for quite some time. The engines were changed. The carriages remained. And we now travelled through the flat lowlands of the Netherlands to a place called Hoek van Holland. I've been there since quite a number of times. For I remember the Association of Jewish Refugees, of which I'm a member, organised a trip to Holland, to Hoek of Holland, 4 years ago, to reenact what was then a sad journey. And this time we were received by the local school children with love and friendship.